There we go. All right. Welcome everybody to the 6th and last session of Children and COVID-19. And let me, as usual, begin by giving you a little preview of what we're going to be doing. And I want to give special thanks to suggestions from several participants, Claudia in particular, and that influenced some resources, all of which have been sent on to you. Actually, it's this kind of a changing thing. After this is over, if you just like, I'll keep collecting things. And even in the last couple of days, there've been things that I've read online or in newspapers and so on that I thought are worthwhile. But I didn't try to keep adding as we went along. But I'm going to just quickly recap a couple of things from the last session, both for live participants and those who will be looking at the recorded version of this session. As promised the last time, I am going to show, I think, 2 more of those little children's video diaries from a couple of different countries. And then we're going to move to our main focus, supporting the adults who care for children. Some general thoughts and what the research says about psychological stress and coping, just as sort of a broader framework, and then focusing on a couple of areas. One, these issues for teachers, childcare providers, and then very much focusing on families. And as I said, their mothers at the center for reasons that should be obvious, but are borne out by the research as well. And a few comments and thoughts from you, if you wish, about grief and loss defined broadly in the context of COVID-19. Maybe a couple final thoughts about lessons for the future, and a little going. It's quite an so last week we started then looking at 2 UNICEF-made video diaries. Those, if you remember, were from children in South Africa and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And you do have the link to the set. I think there are about 9 or 10 of their diaries, and worth having a look at on your own. And then we spent the rest of the session looking at school-age children and the challenges of the pandemic for children's learning. And we paid particular attention to English language learners, and especially the challenge of remote learning and the impacts on their ability to take advantage of all of the learning opportunities that are needed in order for children to make good progress in that area of their development and learning. And also, again, looked at efforts by schools and teachers to do some workarounds and try to continue supporting children who are English language learners. And then we ended by examining different kinds of options for schools going forward. I think I said that, it really isn't an either or, although sometimes it's framed that way. Well, it's either schools completely open 5 days a week and so on, or all remote learning. It seems as if, as it will play out in reality in different communities and different settings, and as some unknown aspects of the coronavirus continues to play out, that we will probably have a lot of different options and combinations and different strategies that teachers may use to make this work for them and for children. And as we were talking about just before we began, Claudia was sharing with me that she had a few thoughts and examples that might be relevant to this discussion of what schools may look like. So if you would be good enough, Claudia, to share a bit of that, then that would launch us off to go forward. Thank you.
Sure. I first wanted to very briefly share a little program that I developed a few years ago to encourage children to recognize their feelings and talk about what made them feel that way. One of the elements that I used was a mirror. So when we were talking about feeling angry, for example, here's a little boy looking in the mirror, expressing his angry face, and a little girl expressing her angry face. Everybody sort of has an idea of how they look when they are happy. Often it's just the line around as if they were drawing a cartoon character. But by looking in the mirror, they became a little bit more aware. So here are some of their drawings looking in the mirror. Happy. And here we have sad, for example. They were in color, but I don't have them right now in color, but you can see how much more expressive they are. And I had them show his angry. It was an all red face. Oh boy, was she angry. And I had them talk also about what made them feel this way. And to me, this could be a very helpful opportunity to engage children in expressing themselves in terms of what they're dealing with right now. And there are, of course, children who'd much rather talk about it or make a story up. And if they're old enough, write a story. There are other children who would much rather draw. So having the different options, I think, is quite valuable. I think, Marilou, you wanted to talk about teachers and organization of classrooms later, or did you want me to?
Yeah, why don't you do that a bit later? That's great. Yeah. I also wanted to comment before Carol goes off that really ties in very nicely with some comments that Carol made a few weeks ago about also the value as someone who's worked as a counselor in the schools of having children do things like journaling. I mean, all kinds of modalities, right? As an early childhood educator, I think about puppets, for example, social stories, as people in early childhood education talk about, and sort of whatever it takes. So thank you very much. That is great. Right, I am going to now share my screen to see if I can scroll down to our video diaries. I want to show you two. How am I going to scroll here? There we go. Okay. The first one I want to show you is, we looked at Joachim in South Africa, if you remember. All right, well, here's the next one that I wanted to show. This is Saira, who is a little girl who lives in Delhi, in New Delhi, India. You will see, in some ways similar to Joachim, relatively advantaged family. Interesting to look at how she is spending her time in, as she said, the lockdown. Do we have the sound?
No.
Sorry, do we have the sound? No. No. Okay, I'm sorry. I keep forgetting that. Okay, no worries. I'm gonna go back, share the screen again, share the sound. Okay, this should be fine now. Sorry about that. Let's go back to Saira.
In Delhi, and this is what I do during the lockdown.
Okay.
Me and my sister love to dance, and this is how we dance. Watching birds with my binoculars. Like this, I can get some fresh air. My father taught me how to play the harmonica in the lockdown, and this is how I play.
Special effects.
So these days I also make art and craft. Art and craft is also good for me. And I've got a Christmas tree. Sometimes I get bored during these lockdowns, so I have spent my time. I have lots of time to write in my journal.
But right now, you can put it under
To keep safe from the coronavirus, this is how you wash your hands. Sing happy birthday twice. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. So, when there's the coronavirus, stay home safely and wash your hands.
I wonder if I just do more videos. Let's see if this is the one I want.
Hi, my name is Abhijay Palluri and I'm 8 years old.
Oh, sorry. Let me see if I can get to the correct one that I wanted. Okay, there's more than one way to skin this cat. Hold on one second. Yeah. All right, this should do it. Sorry for the delay there. This is a little girl from Yemen named Muna.
صباح الخير، معكم منى زايد نازحة من الوازعية تعز إلى عدن مخيم الشعب. تعالوا أوريلكم بيتنا. هذا الحطب هنا نروح نجيبه من مكان بعيد. هنا أمي مصلح لنا القرع. هنا اسمه أختي وبنات خالي يلعبوا بالمكعبات. تعالوا أوريلكم غرفة النوم. هذا أخي سلطان نايم هنا. هذه الغرفة اللي ننام فيها كلنا، ما فيش إلا هي واحدة. هنا أختي تكنس الصالة. تعالوا أوري لكم المطبخ حقنا. هذه هنا أمي تطبخ الأكل، وأمي تشتيني أروح أجيب مي من الخزان الرئيسي حق المخيم أنا وزميلتي. هاي صاحبتي كتير عارفة إنه بنروح نعبي مي بأنوياتي كنا نروح دائما بالمدرسة، والآن قفلت المدرسة بسبب فيروس كورونا. انتي راعي لي هنا من زمان ما أدخل بالحمام بخرج لك، تمام يا رهاب؟ طيب. دون الحمامات دائما ندخل في بهم حق المخيم كامل، نحاول نخليه نظيف مشان ما يصيبناش فيروس كورونا. احنا جينا بسرعة مشان نعبي المي، لأنه لو قعدت الزحمة بينتشر فيروس كورونا من الزحمة. ايش رايكم نصلح بيت؟ يلا. قاقا يوسف بن خالي قابلنا الخضرة. الآن بروح أساعد أمي بقطع معاها الخضرة. كل شيء لازم يتنظف عشان نحمي نفسنا من فيروس كورونا. بنغسل يداتنا تمام عشان نحمي نفسنا من مرض الكورونا، حتى لو ما في صابون نغسل يداتنا تمام. أتمنى لا يأتينا فيروس كورونا أبدا. فرحانة إني بين عائلتي وصاحبتي عندنا بتتغدي. يلا تعالوا بسم الله تعالوا نأكل.
So there we have two more glimpses of children, one in I would call kind of an upper middle class family in Delhi, and a little girl in a refugee camp in Yemen, approximately the same age, although the little girl in Yemen looks much smaller than her chronological age. I share a few thoughts, impressions from what you saw. Last week we talked about resilience and resources that kids have. Quite a complex picture. Just unmute yourself and speak up if you wish, please.
Well, the first little girl, go ahead.
Go ahead. That's all right.
No.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say the first little girl looked like she was having a wonderful time dancing and learning to play the harmonica. And she just looked joyful, which you could imagine if you have your family around you, and her father seemed to be available, at least during the videoing. So you didn't get the feeling that there was anything very sad or distressful about this time, which doesn't seem realistic, but it could be that she's that protected that she's unaware of it. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of similarities, I thought, with the little boy in South Africa, if you remember, Joachim, as well, in that in both cases, the parents were kind of priming them with some new skills. I'm learning to use the binoculars now. And there was, I think, Judith, you were nodding. I think you were seeing that as well, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I also felt, can you hear me?
Perfect. Yes.
Okay. I also felt that the second little girl was making the most of it. And I think it depends on adults around them to make that happen. She just was very proud of showing us what was there and what they could do. It was wonderful to see that.
What really struck me watching that, and I had seen it before, but honestly, I just had tears in my eyes at her sense of pride at both her competencies. I get the water, right? And I'm going to cut the vegetables with my mother, but it was sort of like my camp, and we're going, oh my God, look where that child is sleeping. And she's going, yes, brother sleeps. But on the other hand, I mean, think about it. If you are a child who has been a refugee, to be in a camp that, I don't know if you noticed, but the UN High Commission on Refugees banners were in the background there. And Legos are not like mom didn't go to, Kmart and get the Legos, right? But simple toys, where, the father in Delhi, but I thought there were all these commonalities because there were all these sort of little learning games. And the father was putting together sort of Lego-ish kind of very elaborate copy the pattern kind of things. And the little girl was sitting with putting a very simple kind of put together puzzle together. The UNICEF and Save the Children does the same thing, have these kits, maybe some of you know this, that can be obtained by refugee camps, or if children in communities are in crisis. Some of them are like school in a box, where just very simple learning materials that can be used in very, very different ways. And then there are little booklets of sort of tips for the teachers, usually volunteers, but tips for learning games that can be played, or opportunities for pretend play, making your own little dolls and that kind of thing. So it was, and I think, both kids were really focused on, of course, remember, it's UNICEF that's putting this together, but what we can do to stop the coronavirus. I don't want it to come here. Here's what you can do. The little girl in Delhi kind of shaking her finger at the camera. Here's what you can do. Yeah. Very, very nice examples.
Those were so upbeat, but I saw the article, I guess it was in yesterday's New York Times, about the huge increase in, for example, teenagers having incredible emotional crises, thinking about suicide. So I almost feel as if we are, I shouldn't say whitewashing, I suppose, but looking at the positive side. And if children are fortunate and do have a more resilient personality, which of course interacts with the parent, being able to be responsive to them. And it can be like that, but I feel as if we need to see one or two that are not like that, recognizing certainly not the way everybody is,
Yeah, but that was not the purpose of this particular project, I think.
Right.
I know. That
I
was
wouldn't
not.
think so. Right.
Yeah.
But acknowledging it for us, I just think is important to me.
Well, I think, we have tried to do that. And in fact, somehow I think for ourselves and others, we need to think about that balance and think about concepts of resilience, not as something, as you know very well, not as something that's inherent in children. There's a misconception that children are either born more or less resilient and or more or less interested in things and so on. And there's a lot of evidence that although temperament and so on has some influence, as you know, it also is the case that these are qualities that can be nurtured. And I agree with you that that the process of nurturance has certainly been underway, whatever the economic status of the children in these videos. Let me shift then to go back to our, all right. The main focus this week then, to shift so that we don't end up with a 3-hour session, really is supporting adults, right? We've talked about that indirectly to a fair extent in a number of other earlier sessions, but this is really the main focus. It occurred to me that we should begin, before diving into adults, teachers, parents, mothers, fathers, family members in the pandemic, to just a little bit of background framing about what is known from, particularly from the perspective of psychology, about stress, psychological stress and coping. And as I was mentioning to a couple of people before we started, actually, this is a real interest of mine. My dissertation just a few years ago, was on psychological stress and coping. Actually, you might be interested to know that what I studied, this was in developmental psychology, and it was an observational study of kids getting well child injections. It was in a pediatrician's office, and this is sort of the, yeah.
Okay, you, what is it, a beige car hatchback?
Somebody is not
Okay.
muted. Somebody is not muted.
Okay, so you,
Okay, are we okay? Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, there was something was sort of interfering there. All right, so anyway, with the background of, that was what I did my dissertation research on, which was just how children, young children, cope with well child checkup, and actually was my supervisor who was looking at the actual injections. This was just a well child checkup. But anyway, a couple of points that are emphasized in the literature about psychological stress and coping, if that's not your field, is kind of to get away from the idea that stress is something that it just exists in a situation or an environment. Richard Lazarus and others think about this as sort of a transactional idea. In other words, stress is really the result of a relationship between a person and something in the person's environment, okay? Really interesting to think about. And a lot of what Lazarus and his colleagues have talked about, and they've influenced a lot of other people, is this sort of cognitive but also emotional process of appraisal, that part of the process is a person evaluating or appraising aspects of the environment as a source of stress, as no big deal, and so on. So in other words, different for different people, not only because of qualities that the person has inside himself or herself, but because of the sort of analytical, which may be very quick, the analytical process of appraising at a particular time, the extent to which the situation, the feature in the environment is either threatening, innocuous, supportive, and so on. And although they may happen very quickly, but the idea is, appraising the stress, also kind of doing an emotional check-in, how am I feeling about this? Not just what do I understand about it, and engaging in one or more strategies to cope with this stressful situation. And one of the kind of interesting ways that Lazarus and all have classified coping is as problem-focused or emotion-focused, with often both happening. But problem-focused coping deals with kind of addressing the aspects of the objective situation, eliminating the problem, the difficulty, or addressing some aspects of it, and so on. Emotion-focused coping is really more, how am I able to manage to deal with my own emotional state? That's an oversimplification, but that's the general idea. Another way of grouping or classifying coping strategies, and I'd sort of forgotten this, but I did use this in my dissertation research and some things that I wrote after that, is I think kind of a useful thing to think about. I mean, all of these are like cognitive frameworks, so to speak, right? Conceptual frameworks. Another way to think about it is engaging, it's not either or, but seeking information. One way of coping, and this is actually this Ollie class, would include heavy dose of information seeking. So, you know, here you are, you're encountering this new pandemic, looking, I mean, we're all online, you know, doom scrolling, right, and all that kind of thing. Information seeking is one set of strategies. Comfort seeking is the way that I would label it. Looking for ways of allaying one's anxiety, seeking support from others, and so on. And the third cluster of coping strategies being strategies that help one feel in control or help one exercise some sort of autonomy, independence. And actually, again, if we had more time, it would be sort of fun to talk about all of this, but I'm thinking about those little videos of the children. And I think partly because of the support that they may receive from various aspects of their environment, adults in their environment, friends, and so on, I would think you see all of that in some of the way that those children are dealing with this new and potentially threatening, potentially stressful situation. Moving on, there we go. So that's another kind of broad framework. A more recent perspective, and move that for myself, more recent perspective on stress responses is from Jack Shonkoff and others at the Harvard Center for the Developing Child. And again, many of you, some of the colleagues who are in the childcare field and maybe looking at reporting of these sessions, maybe through their training, very familiar with this. This is, again, an emphasis on the fact that not all stress is bad or damaging. Stress is part of life, and this framework groups responses. It's like stress in itself is not capable of having horrible effects on whether children's development or adults functioning. Normal sources of stress, like starting a new volunteer experience, going to a healthcare provider on a routine visit, these are positive. One's responses are usually positive. There may be a little anxiety, but this is part of healthy development. So there's that. Tolerable stress responses, you know, this may be potentially a more serious and disturbing kind of situation, but often because of the buffers of social support, information that's available, and so on, the response, it's not that the stress is tolerable, the response itself is tolerable, right? What Shonkoff and colleagues point to as a great source of concern in children's development, where in very young children, their brain development can be compromised in not trivial ways, is what Shonkoff et al. Call toxic stress. And this has the potential for lasting adverse effects that can affect adults as well as children, although more of their writing has been about children. And the reason is that chronic intense stress, as in what they call toxic stress, as many of you know, keeps the body, the human body, in this kind of constant state of alertness, this kind of fight or flight sort of response. All systems of the body can be disturbed. And if this doesn't last a long time, you know, it's sort of like a wave, but it can be if continued at an intense level for a long period of time, can truly be toxic. They go on, and again, I'm just, briefly showing you these by way of example before we get more specifically into teachers and parents and so on. Sean Koff and his colleagues at the Center for the Developing Child have more specifically developed kind of an infographic sort of model specific to helping build the resilience of staff. Staff could be teaching staff, people who are helping children, helping families, and families themselves to build resilience. And the way that they're conceptualizing this, and again, all of these models are a bit simplistic, okay? But they're heuristics that, just give a framework, and for some people in some contexts, it's just useful to have something like this to kind of hang your hat on, right? I think this can be useful in discussing aspects of crises with families or with staff sometimes. It depends on the situation. But they're thinking about this as sort of a seesaw with a fulcrum in the middle, right? And the concept is that there's kind of a balance scale, and if there's a pileup of, if you look at the left side, if there's a pileup of stresses, negative experiences on one side, that can tip the scale, so to speak, toward more negative outcomes. The examples there in the context of COVID-19 could be losing a job, schools being closed, so families having greater burden, illness of loved ones, the loss of social connections through distancing, that kind of thing. The idea is, so what can be done to help families, staff, and so on? One thing to think about is that negative side. How can those sources of stress, how can we help families and staff unload some of those? That's one approach. On the other side, if we add more on the right, like, and these are just examples, public policies that, we can think about the relief bill, unemployment benefits. On the more personal level, increasing access to positive relationships, whether they're virtual or otherwise. Again, on the policy level or on the community service level, housing that's stable, access to what families living in poverty don't have, reliable Wi-Fi at times, that connections are absolutely necessary. The third area of intervention to think about is what Sean Koff et al. Call moving the fulcrum. If you move the piece that balances, okay, one way or another, that can also help to offset in just a visual way the preponderance of the tip down on the negative side and make the most of what's on the other side. I'm not saying that very well, but you get the general idea. What they write about there are things like helping staff, families to strengthen what I would call coping skills or life skills. They call them just things like that can help deal with stress and potentially negative outcomes. And they talk about supporting families and staff in knowing how to regulate one's own emotional state, how to develop planning skills so that one can anticipate and organize all of the multiplicity of things that are piling up, helping adults think about ways to relieve their own stress as they care for themselves as well as for their children. So I'm going to leave that there simply because I really want to get into more specifically going beyond these general frameworks to initially focus on teachers, okay? But I do think that some of those, as I say, simplistic as some of the frameworks are, they can be really useful both in thinking in one's own mind and also in communicating with people who are really struggling with these stressful conditions and their own stress responses, and helping them perhaps get a handle on how to approach some of these issues. So I want to look more specifically first at one group whose stress level is kind of through the roof right now, and that is teachers. I'm thinking about, I have an audio clip, but I'm getting a little bit concerned. I really want to make sure we have enough time on families. I think what I'm going to do is say, you have it in your resources. If we have time, we'll have a listen, but I think not right this minute. I want to just summarize for you what we know from some very recent research about the sources of stress among teachers, childcare providers, people who are non-parent working directly with children, often virtually right now, but there's sort of there are three areas as I look at the resources that I've seen, and actually there's not enough yet, but there's pretty clear impacts in three areas, the way that I see it. One is just lower morale among teachers. I have to say quite honestly, morale among teachers, whether we're looking at early childhood educators or elementary and secondary school teachers, for a lot of reasons, morale among teachers, and this is not dissing teachers at all, it has been for some time at a low ebb, right? Early childhood teachers are underpaid, underappreciated, similar issues in public schools, multiple stresses and pressures on teachers. But Ed Week, Education Week, for example, did a research survey recently, and 3/4 of the teachers who were surveyed, these were public school teachers, said their morale was lower than it was pre-pandemic. It wasn't that it was like, oh, everything's fine before the pandemic. And when they were asked about morale at their school, whether they were physically in school or not, 85% of them said, again, this is not surprising, that the morale overall among the teachers, administrators, and so on at their school was lower than it was before the pandemic. About 40% of them said now, during the pandemic, they feel less motivated than they did before the pandemic. Here's a very interesting thing. It says to me so much about teachers and their strengths. Students, I'm not sure if this was the same study or a different one, I can't remember, but students, when they were asked, did not perceive their teachers to be unmotivated. They thought their teachers were really motivated. So, it's sort of like, we can say the same thing about parents, right? Oftentimes, parents and teachers feel like, oh, I just feel like I can't do it anymore and so on. And at the end of the school day, they're just like, oh, let me out of here. But they are able, on average, to keep it together for the children. And this is in this NPR audio interview, which is almost 10 minutes long. That's one of the things that really comes across is the commitment to children. So I thought that was really interesting. Another thing that comes out in some of that research, though still looking at the morale issue, is what I would consider kind of a vicious cycle, okay? In that teachers report, and this is, I'm not sure I could say it's more so for older students than younger. I think it's across the board, but for different reasons. Teachers say, I'm just seeing that students are not as engaged. Duh, what a surprise, right? With all of the struggles of technology and remote learning and often chaotic home situations that aren't really supporting students, whether it's a little kindergartner sitting in front of a screen, you know, for an hour at a time, or a secondary school student who's sharing an iPad with a sister who's trying to do her schoolwork and so on. So there's kind of a vicious cycle at work for some teachers where students are more disengaged. Teachers perceive that, and then teachers feel, they may not show it always, they feel more disengaged. And so that's kind of an issue. Then mental health challenges. Teachers, there are teachers, for example, who, and again, you know, I'm reading a number of sources about this. Certainly, mental health challenges are not unique to the pandemic. There are teachers, as there are people in every field, who have pre-existing mental health challenges. So one of the things that is being found is that those pre-existing challenges, anxiety, depression, are exacerbated by the pandemic. One teacher reported to a journalist not being able to make her appointments with the therapist that she was seeing because of the demands on her time from teaching. So the sources of, or other teachers finding that just the logistics of accessing mental health services at hours that would fit with their newly reconfigured jobs made it extremely difficult. Sources of these mental health challenges include things like unpredictability. I mean, everybody does better if you know what to expect. The constant whipsawing back and forth for many teachers in public schools, especially of, oh, well, we're gonna do in-person learning. Oh, no, now the cases are up, and so we've got to switch back to remote. And I'm used to planning. Some teachers would say, I'm used to planning my lessons a month ahead. And this is secondary school teachers saying, this is the way that I do it. I can't do that anymore because you can't teach exactly the same way if you're teaching remotely. So all of this uncertainty, and I would think frustration at not being able to be as good a teacher as you want. I mean, none of us think we're as good teachers as we want to be, but I'm so far from being the kind of teacher I want to be. I was so unprepared to do this. I can't use the teaching strategies that I know are successful. I don't have the kind of support that I need. The one study in Los Angeles in that school district showed the rates of reported mental health issues for early childhood educators in the Unified School District in LA almost doubled, mainly depressive symptoms. Think about that, right? Yeah. Oh, and just one other thing before we move away from mental health. Two other things. One is, and if you've been a teacher, as I know quite a few of you have, as I have, you know, the in-person, on the fly kind of emotional support that, you know, you're in the teacher's room during a break, just the having somebody to kind of, you know,
that's huge.
Jump with, right? Yeah, you know, you just bitch and moan and get something off your chest. And, that's apparently huge, and that's missing. And also, what a surprise, these issues are, this is previewing what we want to look at next. These issues are especially difficult, the mental health issues, for those teachers who are parents, almost all of whom are mothers in these studies, right? So that's just kind of piling up. And then just much more quickly, resignations. There actually, people were concerned that teachers were going to be quitting right and left, and that has not happened anywhere near to the extent that some people were predicting. And to me, this is personal opinion, I think, again, it's because this came up in one of the videos that we looked at last week. I think she was the principal in a English language learners program. She said, we feel this is a profession. The teachers want to do this as well as they can. This is very difficult, very frustrating for them because they are professionals. And so, you know, they've stuck with it, although there were quotes like, I would rather be a barista at Starbucks right now than be teaching. And there's, I don't know if you can see my little scan there, but those teachers who did leave public school teaching or were immediately planning to, sometimes it was, I'm not paid enough to do this. I'm just overwhelmed. But also, having a loved one who either had a COVID-19 or was at risk, having one's own health challenges, childcare responsibilities were another factor that was pushing people out. So there is a surge of retirements, but given the data on plunging morale, it may be that we're going to see that coming. So, you know, that's, before I ask for some of your reactions on the teacher end of things, I did try to pull together examples of some supports for teachers. And I just want to say a few comments about these. And this was from various kinds of sources, most of which I put in your resources, but things like being offered through schools, optional wellness sessions, mindfulness classes, ideas about monthly virtual social hours. I was thinking about that because my younger son, who teaches graduate school students in school psychology, their faculty are trying to do with the graduate students these social hours. Another school started developing professional development modules about what's called, this was a new term to me, secondary trauma. In other words, if you're, those of you in clinical fields, if you are dealing with people who are traumatized, I'm thinking about people who do home visiting, for example, virtually or otherwise, or children who are living through situations that are truly traumatic, truly toxic. There's secondary trauma, you know, help the helpers really, is what we're talking about. So workshops about that, discussions about the tremendous burden for teachers, and I haven't forgotten, Claudia, about something that you wanted to add, what's called concurrent teaching. There, with the best of intentions, a number of public schools have said, well, let's have a model where the teacher is in the physical classroom. Some kids, you can't have everybody there because of distancing and so on. Some of the kids are in the classroom, others are at home, and the teacher is teaching them remotely at the same time that she's teaching children in person. Be careful what you wish for. Apparently for teachers, this is a source of tremendous stress. And when the more you think about it, it's really difficult to, actually my older son is with college students, has been told to teach this way. And it's almost impossible to use the same techniques that you use for in-person teaching with, for distance teaching. They're two different modalities. And some people have pulled it off, but it's really, really difficult. So there have been some creative ways of changing some of those staffing patterns because people are beginning to recognize that this is easier said. It's not impossible, but it's easier said than done. One of the things I wanted to say is the number one, I should have changed the slide around. The number one thing that teachers said, yes, 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 thank you. This is what helps, is adding more planning time, because they say no one has any idea how much more time and thought and redoing, rethinking is involved in doing this very different, it's not just different teaching methods, but more family outreach and on and on and on. So more planning time, more in fact, teachers with some of these good ideas are like, come on, you think it'll help me to have like a professional development module on something? When am I going to do this? Let's see. How about in the evening when I'm trying to help my kids with their homework? The American Federation of Teachers, I read, I don't know the details, but Randy Weingarten, I think her name is the president of AFT. They have added a trauma benefit to membership benefits that would cover counseling for teachers, for some, I don't know how they define it, you know, mental health trauma benefit. However, very few teachers have taken advantage of it yet, and that may have something to do with the difficulty that we all have of asking for help. I'm going to pause on that and ask Claudia to add some thoughts, and then see what else you would like to say about teachers before we move on to parents. How's that? Okay, Claudia?
Sound.
You?
Claudia,
Can't hear her.
unmute.
Sorry, somehow I got muted, sorry.
Okay, great.
One
We're doing
element
great.
that you just shared, Mary Lou, about teachers being asked to teach simultaneously online and in the classroom. This is one of the greatest reasons our daughter is getting teachers saying, I can't do this. This is just not working. It is so very difficult. I mean, I can't even begin to try to put that together because it must take such different skills and it's such a different focus to try to do those both simultaneously. One of the elements that we had developed when we were seeing children in the classroom was, instead of getting a new group of children every year, having half new and half from last year. So you have a 2-year spread. The children who, let's say, are the youngest and the shortest and whatever, are in 1 year suddenly find themselves no longer the youngest and the shortest in the second year because they have a whole group of children who are younger than they are. So it gives children a very nice opportunity to have a range of experiences with themselves in relation to their peers. Obviously, that is not available right now in most situations, although in childcare, I have a student who's going to be looking for a position. She's just finishing up a program at Berkshire Community College. So I went to do outreach in the childcare programs in the area, and most of them seem to be open on site, which surprised me since they have not gotten shots yet. In Kentucky, I can tell you, my daughter-in-law happily, who teaches young children, has had her shots. So she feels so much relief at that. But we haven't been able to do that yet. And that's so very difficult. The settings are trying hard to keep children isolated. But when you see classrooms of young children, I mean, it's
right. And the teachers are like, the teachers are like, they can't even put their mask on. I have to
right, exactly.
right, to put their little mask on.
Right.
Yeah, I know.
And the first graders who you see who are distanced with their desks apart, I see how I myself feel when I'm suddenly getting my shots and in an environment with other people, and I'm not sure whether to get up to them or move away from them, and I'm wondering what children are going to feel, and teachers, when hopefully this becomes mostly a past tense experience, and how we have to change our behaviors again. It's very challenging. Golly, very, very challenging.
Yeah. Oh, let me make a suggestion. I'm again looking at the time. Let me segue into the parent stuff and fold these two together so that then we can have time to talk about both groups of adults together. Shall we do that? Okay.
Everything.
Families. Just a couple of bullet point statistics, and then if my technology works, I want to do a little bit of audio of the New York Times primal scream. If you really, Claudia, lest you think that it was too chipper with UNICEF, this will pull us right back down again, right?
The ups and the downs.
1 in 4 children in 2020 experienced food insecurity, which was up 5% from the previous year. That seems, when they have done the correlations, to be attributable primarily to mothers' loss of income. Okay. So in other words, families had less food to eat because of mothers' loss of income, right? A lot of this is gender related. This is all from the New York Times. In this one survey, almost a third of women in the 25 to 44-year-old age group said the reason they were not working right now was because of childcare. Interestingly, only 12% of unemployed men said the reason for their unemployment was because of the countervailing expectations for childcare. So, again, the theme is that the burden, the responsibility, if you will, I don't want to exactly call it a burden, but it feels like a burden. The responsibilities disproportionately are falling on women, many of whom are single parents as well. Almost 70% of mothers reported, and this is not being sick with the coronavirus, almost 70% reported adverse health effects of various sorts, which our guess would be mainly are stress related. They may not be mental health, right, per se, but they may be physical effects of psychological stress effects. Compared to, we're not saying fathers are fine, right? About half of fathers also reported adverse health effects, but substantially more mothers. And this was very sobering. I thought there was, I don't know what the baseline was, but a crisis hotline for working parents had a 700% increase in the number of calls. All right, let me see if I can play for you. Wait a minute. I'm not going to share yet. Wait a minute. I'm sorry. Oh. I think I have it. This is the New York Times Primal Scream interactive feature. Can you hear?
Welcome to the New York Times Primal Scream line, where the floor is yours to yell, laugh, cry, or vent for a solid minute.
I just wanted to say, I'm so sick of my goddamn kids. This pandemic has made me realize that maybe I'm not cut out to be a mother.
I am doing my 6th load of laundry today.
Oh, God, every day I think I can't do this again, but then I do. I get it. I get up and I do it. All I hear all of the live long day is mom, 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 mom. What?
Play a few more.
I wish I had the energy to scream. All my energy just goes into getting through every day until I can go to sleep. I have 3 kids, all in virtual school since March, and work full time. And it just feels like failing every day at everything I do. And I just want to change. I want to be by myself for 1 minute. I don't know how to keep doing this. But there isn't really another option.
Okay. Thoughts? Anyone? Claudia?
Well, I'm sure I'm speaking for all of us when I say it's so overwhelming and distressing. You just want to rush in and try to help them. I keep thinking of if we had a different person in our leadership a year ago, could we have organized some kind of pods? Could we volunteer as grandparents? Because most of us, our grandkids aren't near us, and couldn't we be there for them and, organize it in some way that could be helpful? It's just it's really overwhelming. And add that with the numbers of people in poverty, with lack of food, being thrown out of their rentals and losing their jobs. And I want to think about that little girl in India who's playing harmonica and looking at the birds and cheer myself up. But I'm happy for her, but wow.
And you think about building on what you said, I'm thinking about these are in many ways advantaged people. These are people who know the New York Times, right, know that there is the opportunity to call, this number and right, will express themselves in a variety of ways. It's not that they have an easy life. They obviously don't, but
The thing is that this is so overwhelming that there really isn't language, in my way of belief, strong enough to communicate what the world is living through. I feel personally like people like me have it the easiest. I think older people, many people don't agree with me, many people do, but I don't have the same kind of pressures. I don't have children to educate, a job to make money, to put food on the table, as hard as it is. But I was thinking, when you're doing the thing on stress and teachers, the whole You can't even put a word on it. It's so gigantic just for the teachers until you get to the parents. And that situation is just as bad or maybe worse because they can't get away from it 24/7. I don't think we can even conceptualize quite how huge this is, that this has gone on for a year this way. I mean, a son and daughter-in-law, my son's a high school math teacher at the public high school here in Pittsfield. My daughter-in-law is early childhood reading at our most disadvantaged school at Conti. And they're both very upbeat people, and they've set up their house and they bought all these things so we could teach. But they say on top of the sadness when you get all through with it, that if there's supposed to be 12 kids online, which is pretty good, easy, you may not get 6 of them because they don't come from families that anyone is encouraging them to sit at the computer, or there isn't one. I mean, so that's just one piece. And in the best of times, when I was at Pittsfield High School and did a staff support group for anybody on the staff who wanted to come to a place once a month to just be and talk about yourself and laugh and cry. And people said, oh, that's weird. And it wasn't weird. It existed for 11 years. That's before all this was going on. Public school teachers and other public staff as well as teachers, the librarians, everybody felt that. So that's what we're dealing with today. And for parents, I honestly don't, and you're right, those are more advantaged. One thing I was hearing said, be lucky enough to have a career where you can work from home. Our most disadvantaged families can't work from home. They have to be everything and nothing. It's just overwhelming. And I think thousands, Dr. Marilou, thousands of doctorates will be written on this for generations in so many ways. And I think the frustration is that in terms of the public policy area, look at what we haven't done that could be done. Why do we have the worst numbers in the world and so forth? And yet, I mean, for me to just drive in from the doctor on the radio and hear that not one Republican is going to vote for this budget because it's too much money and many people are zillionaires. We've moved ourselves to a third world country practically. The rich get richer, and I mean, so when you're doing that Fulcrum, some of the things were so much public policy issues, as you said, that were on that side of the Fulcrum that we have no personal power other than our vote and our political activism. And then there's all the issues on the other side. So all I can feel in a moment, I'm almost mad at myself because I'm not feeling well. I feel overwhelmed because I just don't see, loads of wonderful people are doing their little wonderful things. Loads of people are helping with food pantries, tutoring, but it's just so gigantic from a public policy point of view that I don't see unless those changes can be made. Anyway, I'm sorry to be venting, but
No, not at all. Laura, I think you were wanting to also share.
No, thank you, Carol, for saying that. And I agree. I feel like, I don't have children, right? I don't have to think about, I don't have to work right now. I don't have to worry about getting kids off to school or having them online to school. I know I have a friend whose son-in-law is an administrator, a principal in Fairfax County Schools. She said she can just see this last year how much he has aged in a year because the responsibility, all of the decisions, and the same thing. I mean, I was hearing in September, that, unfortunately, when it all happened in March, nobody knew anything that was happening, but we didn't sit down and say, okay, what are we going to put in place for September? So September came and we weren't any more prepared, to do it. And I like what you said, because the one thing as an older person that I am concerned about is I am concerned about still guarding my health. And if we had put in pods where I was part of a pod with someone who I had, that I trusted what they were doing, and I could help, that would be fine, but I think those are like small things, they're big things, they're small, civic-minded things that could be done. But then you're very right. We have to, this thing with the schools, that's a big policy thing. I don't think they have, the gentleman here from Connecticut who's going to, I don't think he's in yet, So, I mean, it's like, we need to get these things in place. And it is, it's a different way of thinking about our country, but I do hope it happens. But you're right, it's a lot of work ahead to do that. And I'm sorry, I think you were going to say something.
No, I was just going to say, add the piece about in Massachusetts, the teachers are not vaccinated and there's so much.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
What are we thinking?
Yeah.
What are we thinking?
Yeah.
That
There
is
was,
like an easy one.
Yeah, exactly.
one of
That
the
is an easy one.
resources-
That could be done. I wrote to my mayor. I said, we can
Yeah.
do this, because that's her slogan. And I love her a lot. You know, I just said, we can do this. Before you open these schools, get these teachers. I mean, we have 15,000 people in East Hampton. How many teachers can there be? Get them vaccinated.
well,
You know?
well, just to jump in on that, I did put in the resources, I think, and I'll check. If not, I'll send it on to you. A very good opinion piece that I think was again in Ed Week. One part is two pediatrician professors from Duke, and one is a public policy person. And the fact is that from a purely science base, the vaccines may not be essential for teachers. Their point, however, was it is not hard to vaccinate. Like there are schools, people are in groups. It's so much easier than going around, you know, to this place and that. So one argument is it can be done. As you're saying, Laura, it's not hard. And from the perception, and there is some reality to it. Now there's some data about teacher transmission. I mean, you know, the science, there's the preponderance of science, but then of course there's always new data. So there still are concerns, but there's also the perception on the part of teachers as well as many parents. So there are some very thoughtful arguments there, also from the public policy perspective. So I just wanted to share that as well. I think a couple of other people had wanted to weigh in with any thoughts at all. Really appreciate this. Carlotta.
I think that, you know, we're all recognizing how the pandemic has shown up all kinds of challenges in our country that have been existing, that have just been highlighted through the pandemic. But one of the things that's been interesting to me is I have a very close friend whose daughter lives in Germany. And from hearing what's happening with her children in schools in Germany, it sounds as if the priority has been so much more focused on children and families. So there was a conscious effort to say, what we need to do is get the children back to school. We need to figure out how to keep as many children in school as absolutely possible. And that's a much higher priority than opening restaurants or bars. And it just seems like that we just don't prioritize that here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's see. Who else wanted to share something? Karen, were you, anyone?
Even trying to get the minimum wage changed, the international organizations indicate that we really need to have our base pay at $20 an hour to be above the poverty line. And we can't even move it to $15 an hour. I don't know what all those families are doing. Well, you just saw the numbers of children who are going hungry in this country. We have the most expensive healthcare in the world, and we're like in the bottom quarter in terms of quality worldwide, the bottom quarter. It's just, oh boy, we have a lot of work to do.
And it's not who we think we are. Is the problem.
No, and people in other countries, as you know, there are others besides myself who have spent time working in other countries, including poor countries. They are really, even before the pandemic, they were shocked at the lack of support for children, families, for quality education, quality services, universal health care. They would, I mean, taxi drivers in Indonesia would say to me, even about things like funding for public education. Okay, Carol, you know, like when you try to explain to people about the property tax and how we raised our family in Pennsylvania, and in a suburban school district, a wonderful school district, our kids had everything, right? In that school district, you would get in your car and drive 20 minutes down the road to Chester, Pennsylvania, one of the poorest cities in the entire state. And there was, I mean, I wouldn't send a cat to school in those buildings. And I mean, everything about Chester was heartbreaking. No surprise, predominantly African American. No surprise, predominant unemployment, community violence, everything 20 minutes away. And school, I mean, it's not just school funding, but people couldn't believe that. You mean they're not getting more money? You know, it kind of, I'm cognizant of our time, but just a couple of things that I just really wanted to share that, but before my little 2 cents. With respect to public policy, I mean, I was very involved in policy through the Society for Research and Child Development. I was a policy fellow and so on, and have really kept connected. I agree that a lot of it is at the policy level, but I do think that citizens can have a voice in policy, and professional organizations. I think we have more potential now than we have had. I want to kind of, you know, make a pitch for that. We have to continue to be engaged in policy at the state and local level, as well as at the federal level. And we are seeing more and more, I think, that the hard lessons that have been learned in this pandemic, or maybe some lessons that have been learned, some inequities that have been uncovered, that the spotlight has been shining on as it has not previously. Inequities in educational opportunity, in health services, in every aspect of our life. Those, I think, are honestly going to continue to influence thinking about public policy across the spectrum. I really do. I mean, it's not going to just happen as a magic wand, but just as an example, Claudia, I think you were able to wave this new coalition that really has come about as I'm going to put you on speaker view. Claudia, let's see. How can we get Claudia? This is, maybe you can just, this is a consortium, I would call it, called Kids Are Essential. And maybe you can just tell us. I found this and forwarded it, and then of course I conveniently lost it. So Claudia, tell us what this is.
Yes,
it's just an example.
It's a partnership of many major organizations, such as the Children's Defense Fund, the Education Trust, Food Research and Action Center, Moms Rising, National Collaboration for Infants and Toddlers, National Women's Law Center. You get the idea.
0 to 3, I think, is part of it.
Yes, 0 to 3 is part of it. Over 120 organizations, and they are calling for our leaders to invest in children and families as early as possible and address the economic, health, and racial disparities that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. And so if you go on to hashtag Kids Are Essential, all one word, and each of those words is capitalized, you'll find it.
And this is not, you know, nobody would say that this is a solution to anything, right? But it's an example of, I think, how we can take some of the lessons that we need to deal with big problems. We need collaborations across healthcare, education. Often these organizations, well, we only deal with infants and toddlers. We only deal with families. We only deal with public education. And I think this is a very promising example of the power of bringing organizations together to then influence public policy. And I really do want to end on what I'm an optimist. I do think it's a hopeful perspective. As I said, hard lessons have been learned. We have a much better, sadder appreciation of what the inadequacies are in our country's systems. We've really, I think it's pushed us to look at what our real priorities are and have been, and what's wrong with what's skewed about those priorities, and who is paid attention to, and how relevant certain priorities may be in the future. And I also think that some of the strategies, some of which we've looked at and discussed in this course, some of those strategies that were really born of necessity and kind of built on the fly, home learning, working and meeting at a distance. It's not that those are solutions to anything, but some of them I really do think, and we've been discussing this in groups that I'm involved in, there is potential in some of the ideas that have been tried to apply those in other contexts and in other situations, and they may be able to be incorporated into our lives and our children's lives, not necessarily in negative ways. So I don't mean that at all as a Pollyanna, but really there's technological tools that are just a tool, may be extremely useful if used in less pressure-filled and more thoughtfully implemented ways. So I think my pitch is that we need to learn from these months, which are not over yet by any means, and we need to keep thinking of ways that we can continue to help those who are going to need our support, some of them more than ever, in not just the months, but in the years to come. So I want to end on that note and really thank all of you for both for your participation live or virtually in this OLLI class, and to thank you also for all the contributions that you're making and that you've made to the well-being of children, families, teachers, and so on. And let's wish us all good health and success in the future.
And Mary Lou, we want to thank you so very
Yes.
much for all you've done to make this class so meaningful, and to make it meaningful for those who are watching at their staff meetings and talking more thoughtfully about it. It's been wonderful. Thank you so very much. We all appreciate
Thank you for saying that.
Thank you.
I really
Yes.
appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary Lou, and thank you, everyone. It was great to be with you the last
Yeah.
6 weeks.
There was.
Here too.
And thank you for your support, Karen, Andy, everybody.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
Be well, everyone.
Yep.
Right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Andy.
Absolutely. My pleasure. I'm glad it went well.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Of course. Take care.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Claudia. Thank you for
Oh, it's
making
my
the
pleasure to get to know you
collaboration
and all
help.
your hard work. Thank you very
Oh,
much. Pleasure.